At this time, it is my pleasure to introduce City Manager Taiwo Jaiyeoba.
Thank you. Appreciate that. It's good to see all of you. And I know it's right after 6, right about dinner time, and you could be somewhere else tonight or having dinner, but we appreciate the opportunity for you to join us tonight. So we've been having this for the last pretty much 3 weeks now, and this is our second one for this district, District 3. And I know that we have 2 more next week. But council district or no council district, if you know people who still want to participate, it will be good for them to just show up in the other 2 as well as watch online. But we've had some really good opportunities for me to get people to know who I am, but also getting to understand how your hearts beat for this beautiful city in terms of what are the things that make this city lovely and what are the things that are challenges for us. I know that for the most part, you speak to us through your elected representatives, mayor and council, and that's great, and that should continue. But since I'm new to this space, it's good for me to hear directly also from you, aside from the fact that I hear from that. As the guy who leads this team of 3,500 or so employees, I'm able to understand better what are the things that are frustrations for you all, and what are the things that, yes, we're doing very well that we should continue to do. We have some amazing staff here. But because of the way government functions, it doesn't matter if it's Greensboro, if it's Charlotte, where I'm coming from, or any other city, there are 2 things that are always challenging for the public sector. Number 1, we don't follow up very well. And number 2, we don't often follow through. And sometimes we get information, and that's it. And somebody said it goes go into a black hole. Sometimes that's the way it works, but that's not the way it's supposed to work. And I want us to see how we can make Greensboro an exceptional city when it comes to getting feedback, processing them, and getting tangible results out. There are things that we may never have answers to, either because we're not the ones in control of them as city entities. There are other government organizations that are over those. We'll do our part to make sure that we work collaboratively with those organizations to get the answers. There are some things that may take longer than people will want. Sometimes people want things done like right there, and I get it. I'm a resident, so I do. If I want something to happen, I want it to happen right away. But the wheel of government also turns very slowly, as we know, and it's often driven by how much money you have dedicated or devoted towards certain things. But we'll do our part to be able to say, even if we don't get a solution today or tomorrow or the day after, we will get that thing working in a few months, or at least give you an idea what a timeline looks like. So this is not a one and done thing. My goal is that meeting with you all this time, we're going to come back again in some months to be able to say, okay, when I started this job, here are the things that we heard from you. And now that I am off the honeymoon period, here are the things that we've been doing to be able to address some of those things. And maybe there are things that are going to come later than sooner. But I want you to understand that we want to build on the successes that been achieved before I got here, as you've seen with the economic development announcements. But I also want to make sure that we are a government that's functioning for our residents as your city manager. And at the end of the day, council has to make the decisions over the things that get done and the policies that we enact and all of that. I want to be able to make sure that what we present to them is a very good and positive and accurate, to a degree, picture of what we heard from you. And that will indirectly and directly drive their decision on budget process, and that's coming in a few months. So that's really why I believe this is important. So on one hand, it's important because I'm new and I'm introducing myself to the community. But on the other hand, it's not because I'm new, it's because I also want to hear directly from you so that I can direct and lead our staff to deliver properly to you. There are two things that we're doing while we're listening to this community, doing these listening sessions. We're also conducting a community survey at the same time that kind of gauging some sensitivities from the community. What are the things that are working? What are the things that are not? And we're going to have those results collated at the same time as we're working through this. The second thing is that Council is going to have its annual strategic session end of March. I believe it's March 23rd and 24th. I want to be able to get to Council and say, hey, here are the results, at least a summary of what we've had over the last several weeks and the next week, and also the results of the community survey. Somewhere there should be an alignment with those priorities that Council set about a year or so ago. Those priorities focus on equity, they focus on sustainability, they focus on public transportation, funding balance, fund balance. They also focus on affordable, safe and affordable housing, as well as how can we make sure that as a city we have the income that can get people out of poverty. So those are the 6 things that are priorities for Council. I believe personally that those are key priorities. But I'm curious to see whether what we're hearing from you through this medium and what we're hearing from the community through the survey align with those 6 priorities, and maybe we expand those priorities beyond what they are right now. So that's why we're here tonight. I'd like to hear from you ideas. I'd like to hear from you questions. There are some of them that I may have answers to, and I will share those answers based on my experience. There are some that I may not, and maybe before the end of the evening we will. But if we don't, then I will let you know how we're going to get the answers to them. But this also is going to be recorded, and it will be on our website so people can still go back and reflect on them, and you can email. But I'll stop there, and then let's have conversation. So once again, welcome, and hopefully we have a very engaging group tonight like we had, I think, last week. And so let's do this. Thank you.
So did we just come here and ask a question? Well, I'll go ahead and be first. I am Lisa McMillan, and I'm actually a resident of District 2.
Okay.
My first question for you is, how do you have accountability for the departments that have systems in place, yet the citizens are still suffering? So I'll give you an example. I have a physical disability. I have a duly licensed handicap placard, and I have experienced several times other people without placards parking in handicapped spaces. And one time, I didn't even have options, and I couldn't even go into the building. And I contacted the department that's supposed to handle that, and I was told, call back at a different time or a certain time, and someone will attend to it, but no one ever did. I experienced that 3 times within the last year and a half. If you have systems in place for citizens, but there's no action, what is your leadership going to do to make sure that there's accountability for citizens who actually are vulnerable and have no options?
Thank you very much. Good question. I think it falls into 2 areas that's similar to what we've been hearing. One is enforcement of our own regulations. And if we have a regulation in place, for example, that says do not park in this place, and we know that people violate that, then we have to enforce that. That's a challenge for us, I'll admit that, but we will overcome that challenge. The second piece of it is this. One of the first things that I said when I came in and I had a meet and greet with our staff and department heads is that we will be accountable to the community, to the elected officials, but also the community. But it's hard to demand accountability if you don't set expectations. My expectation as city manager is that we're going to be prompt and we're going to be responsive, not just reactive, not to wait until we hear, but really being responsive to what we hear from the community, and also understanding that if we've had it a number of times, it means it's a serious thing, and we need to address it so that even if we hear it again, it's not going to be from the same person. So you can expect that we're going to continue to have that conversation with our department heads, and I know that the pandemic has slowed down a number of things, but that should not be an excuse for us, especially as we come out of it. So you can maybe hold me accountable for that over the next few months we'll see some improvements in that, not just with the disabled parking. I can tell you I've seen that a lot. When people they don't have the tag on their license plates, they don't have it hanging on their mirror, but they're parking there in the place they're not supposed to. Makes it difficult for restaurants to do business, makes it difficult for government offices to respond to you. But beyond that also, though, is other things that we do in the city that fall into about the same thing. How are we responding to this? How are we holding our staff accountable? We will continue to do that. And you can hold me accountable for that.
You got it. Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Nicole Lindahl, and I'm actually, as of now, a lifelong resident of Greensboro. I'm also employed by Bicycling in Greensboro, which is our local bicycling advocacy group. Let me begin by saying that I've heard so many positive things about you, like in Grand Rapids, and the things that you were able to, your successes there. And I'm looking forward to being able to see the positive outcomes here as well. Mm-hmm. And already, you're off to a great start, community engagement. So you're putting on these events. You're making an effort to listen to what the community wants. And this is something that the city has not done well. So I'm thrilled about that. In fact, when I go to neighborhood meetings, I often hear negative comments. It's part of my job to visit these neighborhood associations when they have their meetings. And I hear things anywhere from speeding, ongoing speeding issues on neighborhood streets, to college encroaching on a neighborhood without having had proper community engagement beforehand. Food deserts, a lack of adequate transportation or safe infrastructure to potential jobs, and that's just a few of those that I have heard come up. So genuine, ongoing efforts to engage the community in the process are very much needed. And when I mean genuine, it's not just a routine, a forum to say that effort was made, And I think you really get this. But that people's wants and needs are taken very seriously, and efforts are made to incorporate community ideas into projects. And that just as you have done with these events, that you go to the community on a regular basis, especially those that are in lower income areas that are historically underrepresented. And secondly, infrastructure. So don't get me wrong, 10 years ago, our streets we are in much better shape now than we were in the past, and we keep improving. For the most part, our arterial roads, though, the main roads, the roads like New Garden Road, Battleground, Gate City Boulevard, those are getting worse because there's more congested than it used to be, and they're not improving. To handle that in a way that leads to safe conditions. So can you imagine if Greensboro actually made streets that arterial roads, major roads, that drivers were too scared to drive on? And how would anyone get anywhere? And they're almost unavoidable, these roads, right? Mm-hmm. Well, that's how it is for cyclists, for pedestrians. And Battleground Avenue, for instance, they recently have been repaving it and redesigning it. It was redesigned for cars. I have to go to board meetings for Bicycling in Greensboro. Our board meetings take place in the Benjamin Library. I take the Greenway out there, and then I actually have to cross Battleground. That is scary. It's no joke. I mean, you've got multiple lanes, and people driving at speeds they should, we should, but don't get me started on all that. Anyway, it's not the kind of road that we should have in the middle of our city. So I would like us to change from that 1950s mentality, which is getting cars from one place to another as quickly as possible, to a mentality that helps create a transportation system for all people, whether they ride the bus, or they walk, or bike, or drive, and that safety, equity, and accessibility become priorities, and over moving cars quickly. And, honestly, I would have liked to have seen a road diet on Battleground. I would have liked them, I feel like the priority should be safety and not this level of service, this constant need to move traffic as quickly as possible, no congestion, blah, 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 because, it's safer for people when drivers are driving slower. It just is. And having a really wide road like Battleground, it encourages people to speed. And it creates conditions that are unsafe for everyone. So sometimes, I'm almost finished my little rant here, but sometimes the change that's needed to help people that do take alternative transportation is so small and so important. And again, to reiterate what she just said, it's like I have mentioned a couple times to the Department of Transportation, which is doing an awesome job, and they're probably just overloaded. But it's like you don't feel heard. And so I mentioned that when I live in Glenwood, so I ride on Marion to Ellington, and I don't know if you're familiar yet with our roads, but I have to make a left quite often onto Gate City Boulevard. And so when the Coliseum, which is right there, is not open and doing an event, there's usually no car there to activate the metal detector loop that's in the road. So I have to run the light, and that light was there for a reason, and there's a sharp curve there. And someday I'm going to be in trouble, It's like those little tiny changes like that mean a lot. It's listening, just like you were talking about earlier. Anyway, I appreciate you taking the time to do this. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate that. There's a lot in what you just said, but I definitely understand. It kind of goes back to mobility investments. I don't know if anybody has any similar thoughts or ideas, but that you just brought. Nicole, right? One of the goals in our comprehensive plan, GSO 2040, is to be a car optional city by 2040. To a number of us who are in the audience or who are listening, we're thinking, that's like 18 years' time, so that's a long time to come. But the fact is that it's not, right? It's going to be here sooner rather than later. And today is when we make investments to get us there. And so part of our goal as a city is to do some of what you said, shrink the width of some of our roads, especially when they're interior roads, so people can safely cross. School children, people on wheelchair, people on walking sticks. Share my example of when I asked the Metroliner Association for the Blind to blindfold me to walk around the city of Charlotte because I wanted to know what visually impaired people go through on a day-by-day basis. We walked only a couple hundred feet, and I told them to remove the blindfold because I felt unsafe rather. I could just hear the cars whizzing past me, and what we wanted to try was to get me across a 4-lane street to catch the bus on the other side. But first of all, the traffic signal was not timed long enough for me to be able to use my stick to even cross one side. So if I did, I was going to be stuck on the island, which was very unsafe because it was a narrow strip of concrete. And once I get to the end of that street, of that road, then I probably, in all likeliness, will have missed the bus. And so I will have had to wait about 15 or 30 minutes for that bus to come. So that's the challenge. We design our cities for people who are physically able-bodied. Many times we don't consider those who are not physically able to do that. But not only that, we design our streets for vehicles and to get them to move quickly, to get to where they need to go. That's not a challenge in Greensboro, but I think Greensboro is one of those few cities, frankly speaking, in my mind, that specifically called out the desire and the vision to be car optional. To be car optional means we have to invest in non-vehicular means of travel. Public transit, not singular, public transit, you can still use vehicles, but at least not one person is on it. Bicycle, like you, or people use scooters, or even use greenways to get to work. Then secondly, we have to get our employers to buy into the concept that some of your employees don't need to drive to get there. They may just take the bus, or they may ride their bicycle. So if they ride their bicycle, do you have shower stalls for them in those buildings, for them to change when they get in sweaty on a summer day to come to work and to be able to safely go back home? So there are some ways we can do this, but it's definitely going to take deliberate investment in the Actually, I was just studying the GSO 2040 plan on my way down here today, and I was reading that particular goal and the different policies under it, and I realized to myself that it's going to take deliberate investments, budget-wise, year after year, to get us to get there. But there's also something in the bipartisan infrastructure law that we can take advantage of in terms of being able to create workable, safe communities. And I'm not talking about the wider street. The other day I wanted to take a bus route to the convention center, and I was looking at a particular bus route, I think it's 10 or 11, and I was quickly told to take Route 2 because if I took 11, it was going to drop me on the other side of the convention center, and I would not be able to safely cross Gate Boulevard. No transit user should have to be forced to make a choice of which bus route to take simply because the roads are not safe. And so that was my experience, and I'm new, so I can imagine people who have lived with this for such a long time. And so how we make investments in that going forward is really going to be very important, so that all of us in this room today, including myself, we want to be able to look back 5 years from now and feel that tonight we had a conversation around making incremental investments. But I think if we use our budget, it will have to be incremental. But if we go after some grants of the bipartisan infrastructure law, it can actually help to do something transformational rather than incremental. And hopefully that's a place we can get to within the next couple of years rather than wait for 2040. Did I speak to that a little bit better? Okay, thank you. Appreciate that. I'm also a bicycle rider, so I get it very well. Although I don't look that way right now. But
Hi, Ty.
Yes, sir.
My name is Ed Hannon. I'm also with Big Bicycling in Greensboro. Welcome to Greensboro, by
Thank
the
you,
way,
sir.
Ty. My complaint tonight is with a brand new roadway, Horsepen Creek, and thank you for putting in some bicycle drive lanes. But what we've got is a raceway now. We've got a 4-lane divided highway where the speed limit's 35, and I'd say the average car is doing 55 to 65. And I'm hoping that maybe you can use your position to get something out there, maybe radar signs from the police department, maybe more unmarked cars, maybe some more foliage in the greenway and the meridian that will help soften it and slow down the drivers and make those beautiful bike lanes user-friendly. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think that's something that's doable, so I'll look into that.
Since we're on the theme of transportation, I'll go next. So good evening. My name is Gail Dempsey. I'm also on the advocacy committee of BIG, and I've lived in Greensboro about 12 years so far. I'm very active in the community, including being a past president of the Greensboro Velo Club and the current vice president of the Piedmont Hiking and Outing Club. And so the members of these organizations use the streets and greenways of Greensboro on a daily basis. I watched your YouTube video from 2022, and I was inspired by hearing our leadership focus on being intentional and deliberate, and the realization that the investments will improve the equity of Greensboro. So I support the ideas of livable, equitable, sustainable, and proud. And when I've seen communities with these attributes, I've always thought of the word enlightened as well. And you wanted to know what we're doing well here. I think a great example is our Folk Fest, because it's free for attendees. So that's a place where everybody comes together. So today I wanted to bring forth 3 ideas. And I have put these forth in various formats previously. And so far, they haven't made it into a plan, as far as I know, even a long-term plan. So I was excited to hear the Mobility 2040. So that gives a location for some of these to be placeholders. There are so many important projects ongoing. So number 1 is a smart crosswalk at the corner of Hill Street and Wendover. So one of our main bike shops moved to Hill Street, and so a lot of the bike rides start and end there. But if you're on Hill Street and you're getting ready to cross Wendover, the light is not long enough for everybody to get across. So if it was a smart light that could see when everybody's across before it changes the light back for the cars, that would be great. Because also right there on Wendover, it's partly downhill, so the cars could be coming pretty quickly. So since the time I organized what I was going to say today, I was also made aware of 2 other really tricky intersections. One where the Greenway crosses Gate City Boulevard at Murrow Boulevard. When the Greenway has the walk sign, simultaneously the oncoming traffic has a green arrow to turn left across the walkway. So at the very least, that's a conflict of interest or a conflict of instructions, or at the worst, it could lead to a walker being run over by a car. And so that made me think of the Vision Zero that I know Greensboro has. And then the other intersection is where Glenwood Avenue reaches Gate City Boulevard right after it goes under the tunnel, under the train tracks. And that light is very short, and it's also an intersection used by many students close to Greensboro. So those were a couple really specific examples. The second item is, again, very specific. On the Greenway, on the A&Y, actually, on the A&Y, about a quarter of a mile to a half mile east of the entrance to the Trail for Wild Turkey, there's this very abrupt dip, and there's a spillway right there. And even if you're going nearly 0 on any kind of bike, it's very uncomfortable. So again, this might be a very low priority, but just want to get it on the list somewhere. And then third, more broadly, you might be aware the roots are just tearing up the A&Y. So I would like to see, especially between Burr Mill and Strawberry Road. So it would be great to see a plan for resurfacing, a plan for maintenance on the A&Y, which is a real treasure of our city. So in summary, smart crosswalks, the dip on the A&Y, and repaving of the A&Y. Thank you.
I love these ideas. Very specific.
Yeah, the Atlantic and Yadkin Greenway.
Okay.
The rails to trail.
Okay. Very well. Thank you. Thank you very much. I can also assure you that we're documenting everything you're saying. So they're not just going to disappear somewhere. And the ones that we believe don't need any analysis and they are part of what we're going to do, we'll just get to do them. And there are some that could be a result of analysis that we still have to do. So, but we will take all of this ideas and definitely make sure that we look at them all. I have a couple questions of my own, but for you all to consider, but I'll want to hear from you first. So anybody else?
Hi, my name is Mark Schultz, and I've been living in Greensboro about 20 years. I recently retired from UNC Greensboro, and I'm also a longtime leader, participant in bicycling in Greensboro. And I just want to add a couple other things about transportation and and one of them is at the intersection of equity and transportation. And I am well aware of, of the dangers of, quote, driving while black. And so I'm hesitant to call for more speed enforcement because, to be honest, our police department doesn't have, the best record over time. But I think there's literally today I live near the Coliseum, near the corner of Florida and Westgate City. And so I'm constantly crossing from one side to the other on Westgate City on Florida. And, I could, if I stood out there and counted, there'd probably be 40, 50 people a day who run that light. And not running yellow, like running the red. And literally today, as I was riding here, someone put out their hand for me to stop, as they were running the red light. And they could see me, they could see the danger, but it's we just put out our hand and tell the bicyclist to stop, everything will be fine. And it's so I hope you will consider, to me, a way around that conundrum is red light cameras, and there takes the personal police bias out of the equation, and everybody should be treated the same way with red light cameras. I guess my most immediate concerns are on our small arterials. I recently joined a kind of Friday afternoon discussion of old people, fellow retirees. And when I joined the group, they wanted me to introduce myself, and I said, "Oh yeah, I bike a lot, and I know, blah blah, this person from so and so." And after I got done introducing myself, literally every single one, I think there's about 8 people in the group, had a story about how 20, 30 years ago they could bike on Friendly, or they would be willing to bike on, Wendover or whatever. And today, not a single one of them bike. And, so it's another one of those conundrums. You got economic development and more people. But to the extent we have economic development and we have it car-oriented, it's going to make this city worse. And roads that I can ride on today, because I'm a pretty fearless bicyclist, like Florida and Elm Street, etc., when I'm 80, won't be willing to ride on it anymore. So I hope that's not what happens. Thanks. Oh, one question. One last comment, one question. One, there's a guy who's a longtime bike advocate in town named Sheldon Herman who lived in Grand Rapids, and he has nothing but wonderful things to say about what you did while you were there. But I have heard also that you were in Sacramento for a while.
Yes.
And my question is, Sacramento's next door to Davis. And Davis, even though I've never been there,
bicycle capital.
has the reputation of being probably the best small town to bike in the country. Mm-hmm. So what did you learn from that?
A very, very good question. So Sacramento, just about Well, when I lived there, it's totally different now with the traffic congestion. It was roughly about 15, 20 minutes drive from Davis. And I remember that my boss lived in Davis, but worked in Sacramento. And he will ride his bike on the, so there was a bridge that connected West Sacramento, Davis, and Sacramento, and he would ride his bike on the pedestrian portion of that bridge and be able to connect with trails, roughly a total of 25 miles that Anthony would ride. But from his house to the bicycle, from his house to the place where he will actually be able to get on the bicycle trail was so easy for him to do that. But once he got to Sacramento, then he had to put his bicycle on the bus to get to work, but it was also a short distance. But the reason why he would do that was because he wasn't bikeable from that point once he gets to Sacramento to get there. But Davis is a good example of a place where you have bicycles more than vehicles, and people use it a lot, but it's also a university town, it's University of California, Davis campus. So a lot of the students and faculty and business people, there are apartments that actually marketed the apartment based on the fact that you could get dedicated bicycle space and things like that. So if you were to rent an apartment with a bicycle, you are not forced, so you could unbundle paying for car parking space from your rental. You know how some apartments these days, you just pay for the apartment, including parking space, even if you don't have a car, right? And they will still charge you. But in Davis, they could unbundle the car from the parking, from the rent. So you could rent an apartment if you don't have a car at a lesser cost simply because you have a bicycle. Of course, because there's a lot of bicycle. I think the same thing probably happens in Minneapolis. As some of you may know, Minneapolis is the bicycle capital of America, despite the weather. But I think they've also explored how you could do things like that. With 70,000 students in Greensboro and 7 colleges, we have a potential to be that city also, especially in the Southeast, where we could encourage a lot more students to use bicycles rather than have to drive, because the amount of money you save by having a bicycle on an annual basis is incredible. And the amount of contributions you make to environmental quality, let's not even talk about that, just by using the bicycle. It's going to take a culture shift and people understanding that having a bicycle is not enough to have bicycle infrastructure, but that has to connect with transit services. It also has to connect with, the type of how we design our roadway. We're not near there. I can tell you that. I've been here 4 weeks now, and I've driven around. And if I'm riding my bicycle in this city, I will spend the bulk of my time looking back because I don't want to be hit. Even if I know that clearly it shows I can ride my bicycle there, there are people who just will not necessarily take that serious. So as we invest in mobility, it may be that we start striping some of these areas rather than just leave them open. We start striping them with different colors so that people can safely ride and have experience. But Davis was definitely a great example of a place to use when you're looking at the connection between bicycle space and housing. Last year in Charlotte, I think we were able to present to council a novel idea, which to Charlotte was a novel idea, but I think it's been done in Phoenix, and that is to have a car-free apartment complex, or a car-free, which really the developer, Clay Grubb, proposed this development that will encourage people to use bicycles and had no vehicles parking space. That was tough for council that had been used to doing otherwise, but gladly they approved it. It was a split vote, but it was approved. And I think that another development is going on now that will mirror the same thing. Imagine in a city of almost 900,000 people, and that's Charlotte, that you could do that. I think we may be able to do something like that here. And by the way, that development was about half mile from the nearest transit stop, but it was close enough to trails that people could still use their bicycle and go to grocery stores and go to church and still do all of that stuff. So, you know, it just have to be that we have a mental shift and a culture shift, but also educating people that having developments like that that's only associated with use of bicycle is not a bad idea, especially in a growing city. The closer you are to the center city, the more likely you are to drive less. If there is more investment in bicycle trails and public transportation. But the further out you go, then the more we have to find a way to get you, you know, transit and probably even safer trails that you can still ride 25, 30 miles out on your bicycle and not feel threatened by the automobile. We're not there yet, again, like I said, but I'm hearing a theme tonight around transportation, but not just transportation, but active transportation. And that's a good thing that we're thinking that way, because if we're going to be able to do our city, this is the time to start making that type of investment. Now you bring back all these memories of Grand Rapids and Sacramento. I've forgotten a few of those. But
Well, I'd like to throw a little loop in there, but it does feed into what they're talking about. There had been talk for many times about tiny home living, and with the way Greensboro is set up and some people not being for it or what have you, but are you familiar with or interested in introducing opportunities for those pockets? And so when he brought up California, I thought about some of the communities that were in California, because I do understand if I bought a ginormous house, and that's my choice, right? If I want to be in a ginormous house, I don't want my property value to be affected by a 300 square foot house, and it makes sense. But there are several areas where I see, I'm a lifelong resident of Greensboro, except I lived in Charlotte for about 2 years. But there are areas where I do see that there could be pockets, and it could be closer to the work livable model where people can cycle, where people can walk, and it's not in those areas with the ginormous houses, that it wouldn't have as huge of an impact on people who make those choices. But that would address some affordable housing issues. And I mean, it's so many people that seem to have the interest, but the municipalities are having trouble getting on board because of the impacts to the grander plan. But with this transportation being a theme, and with having car neutral or car options, I mean, it seems more logical to be able to have options for affordability that can be closer to shopping and grocery and restaurants. So do you like it or don't like it?
yeah, I mean, I totally support diversity in housing types. I support tiny homes. If you know my story in Charlotte, that's something that I push hard for in the comprehensive plan and the subsequent land development ordinance that's going on right now. Rarely does a city's land development ordinance regulate the sizes of homes. That's something we need to think about. Rarely does. Usually most ordinances will talk about this dimension of the parcel and what you can build on a body. It will not tell you whether you could build 300 square feet or 3,000 square feet. Rarely does, but most people don't know that. The thought that tiny homes or duplexes and triplexes impact property values negatively, there is no evidence, in fact, for it. None. It's all anecdotal. That if I put apartment complex next to where I lived in Charlotte, there were right across the street from me homes that were going for less than $100,000, and they were not particularly great homes. And this particular subdivision that I lived in, homes were going for about $300,000 and $400,000. I mean, nobody seemed to worry so much about there because it takes more than housing product to affect property values. Quality of schools, crime, economy, traffic congestions. Those are bigger issues that you don't solve on a micro scale. You solve them on a macro scale. And they don't necessarily impact your home values. Now, having said that, there may be a possibility that if we allow developers to go to a place, for example, where land is cheap and we can't control that, market does that for them, they may gentrify and result in displacement. So how can we build and at the same time integrate into what we build some anti-displacement mechanism? For example, let's say I've lived in a community since I was 35 years old, and I lived in a 1,500 square foot home, and I'm having kids, and I like to stay there. My doctor is there, my dentist is there, my relationships have been formed there. Once I turn 65 or 70, that 1,500 square foot home becomes too big for me. Kids have gone, I want to downsize. The likelihood is that if there is no town home or a smaller square footage in that community, I end up relocating, losing my relationships, maybe change doctors or dentists and all of that. People should not have to lose their relationships simply because they age. People should be able to stay in place and age in place because you have diversity of housing products for them. I've seen examples of tiny homes that are successful. Wilmington, North Carolina is a very good example of a lot of tiny homes, so they're beautiful too. And frankly speaking, they haven't impacted the home values, maybe because there's some ocean close by. But I think that in a city like ours, that's about 300,000 people, and at the same time, where we have younger people on one end of the spectrum and seniors on the other end, there's going to be more demand for smaller square footage. As a matter of fact, what the National Association of Realtors is telling us is that by 2030, there will be more homes less than 1,500 square feet than bigger than that. In other words, as we grow older, we demand less square foot. That's why we have to have more diversity in housing, because it allows us to age in place, allows us to stay in place, but it also allows us to live in different communities. Equity is good business. Communities where people go to are places where you have choices. And so we can't talk about choices of mobility and not talk about choices of housing. They go together. And I would say that it is more cost effective to serve areas that have smaller footprints of housing than areas that have larger footprints of housing. Ask anybody who supplies transit service, water, roads, solid waste. They will tell you that it's more cost effective to serve areas where you build smart than areas where you sprawl. That's just the way it is.
Thank you. So one follow-up to that, dealing with housing, and then I'll sit down for you to answer this. What is your vision for the Airbnb business here in Greensboro? Because it's interesting, but what is your vision for how to regulate that, to have it a comfortable opportunity for people, but also to make other residents who are not wanting to participate and be negatively impacted by
feel comfortable
too? Thank you.
Short-term rentals. We refer to them as short-term rentals. Especially during tournament season, when hotels are booked, people are likely going to go into neighborhoods and rent Airbnbs, and sometimes they turn into party homes for that week or that weekend. So I get that. We are looking at our land ordinances right now, and that's one of the things we're looking at. I believe in free enterprise. We have to encourage people to do what they can, but at the same time, the whole notion of city planning is about community welfare and health. If I no longer feel that my community, if my welfare has been threatened in my community because of noise pollution or because of trash build-up and all of that, then it defeats the notion of city building and city planning. So as we go into looking at what ordinances are there, I'd actually asked the planning staff to listen to a webinar that was being done by the City of Charlotte last week, Thursday, on short-term rentals, because they're struggling through that right now, Airbnb, and see what we can learn from them as we come to council to present to them in the near future what our goals should be. I believe that we should have Airbnbs, but they should be regulated so that they don't become nuisances to communities, especially in established neighborhoods. We hear complaints about noise today, and I tell you that people can do it, but they also have to be held accountable so it doesn't become a nuisance to people who live in those places. So that's kind of how I see it. I know time is gone, but I have two thoughts for you, and I'd like to hear your response. One is an idea, the other is a question. The idea has to do with trees coverage. We've talked a lot today about walkability, about people riding their bicycles on city streets and things like that. But it is hard to ride your bicycle or walk longer distances, especially in the summer, when there is no coverage. And one thing that I haven't heard since I've been here or even found is an advocacy group for trees in Greensboro. I know there are people who are passionate about it, but it would be good to know if there is a group out there that's really, just like you have groups around bicycle, it would be good to have a group around wanting to maintain our tree canopy. If there's such a group, I'd like to meet with them. If there's no such a group, I'd like somebody to start it, and I'd like to be involved in that group. So if you're hearing me on YouTube or you're here tonight, if you want to pull something like that together, that's an idea I'd like to put out there, especially because it helps to walk your city streets. And trees are not just beautiful because they're beautiful. They help us to live long. They have health benefits to them. But they also help us to achieve our goal to be carbon neutral city because of their contribution to air quality, stormwater drainage, all of those things. So trees are great. And like somebody reminded me last week, even shrubs are better. And so if there's a group out there or somebody interested in that, I definitely want them to reach out to me. I'd like to have a conversation. The second thing, though, is a question. And that is streetlights. I worry that we have large swaths of our city that are in the dark, especially after hours, either because the streetlights are absent or they are broken. Am I the only one who feels that way? I mean, and because streetlights, when they're not present, safety becomes an issue. God forbid you're driving at night, your car breaks down, there's no street light, and you don't know where to go. And then I tend to see that those sites are more on the east side of town than on anywhere else. Am I wrong there? I'd just like someone to speak to that. So the first one is an idea around trees, and the second one is a question around street lights. Just kind of want to hear, and I know we've hit on 7, but maybe we started at 6:06, so let's take a few more minutes and just talk about those two things if you want. Maybe you can come use my mic so you don't have to go all the way there.
I guess my what I got to speak about is just what's going on with me.
Okay.
Okay. Over a certain time, I had a stroke at 2020, and I came back to work 2000. Well, I had a stroke in 2000. I guess it was May of 2000, and I came back to work in April. I was out of work starting the end of 2000, around November, And during that time, I was able to come back to work here, and Deborah Stevens told me that I couldn't come back because I had a stroke. But my doctor and medical service passed me to come back. But instead, they took my job out. So then came up to April of last year, I went back to work. And instead of them giving me my job back, because I was the one that did everything here, all this work, they didn't give me the job back. In other words, they just gave me what they want to give me. The problem is that the job that they gave me now, I ain't going nowhere with it. I was always a carpenter. I'm always be a carpenter. It don't make sense that they told me one thing, but in another thing they put me somewhere else. I think I didn't talk to you. I talked to the city manager before you, and he never got back with me. The mayor never got back with me. Nobody got back with me about this. All they did was just pushed it along like you said. And I'm still in the same position.
So you're still an employee with the city?
Say what?
You are still an employee of the city?
Well,
You
they
still
put
work?
they put me in a job,
Okay,
okay? But the job has nothing to do with what I do.
okay.
You know, I build things. I'm good at that.
Okay. So what I'll suggest is let's have a conversation after this, because I don't know the details. I'd like to know more about what happened.
Okay.
Okay? But I appreciate you stepping up. Yeah. Any other comments based on what I just raised?
I'll talk about streetlights just briefly. One is, yeah, there definitely are areas. I mean, I had a bike breakdown on Whittington Street at dusk, and yeah, there weren't many streetlights. And I know your transportation department knows about this, but when they redid Gate City Boulevard, they put in these new breakaway metal streetlights, and probably have saved some lights because probably 8 or 10 of them are down. And the problem is that they're not getting replaced because when they did that remodel, the city took responsibility for replacing them, but they apparently weren't thinking about it because they have no plan to replace them. I mean, they haven't replaced a single one that's been knocked down. So that's a concrete thing to push to get resolved. The only last thing I'd just say is I like to look at the stars, and streetlights don't get along with that so well, but you can, you can install streetlights that are pointing down and are focused, and I hope that you do that.
And that's what I'm talking about, actually. Any other thoughts on that subject, or the subject of trees?
After you raised the question, I just looked up saving trees in Greensboro, and it looks like there's a local group that fights for clean air and safe water, and there's a lady by the name of Hazel Landers, and there's a group that launches an initiative to save trees in Greensboro. So maybe
I would
we can
love
reach
to
out
meet.
her.
I would love to meet them.
Maybe we can connect with her.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you.
In respect to your question about streetlights, so I can make sure I get the information to the right people in the community. I've lived on East Greensboro, and yes, to your point, there are a lot missing. But the information, when I know I was there, and other people have the assumption, the opportunities get shifted. So if you talk to the city about a street light, it's like, well, Duke Energy covers that. Then if you talk to Duke Energy says, well, you have to pay for it. So my question for you is, are you wanting information in respect to, yes, we're open and would love to have street lights, and is the city of Greensboro going to help get that accomplished? Because I'm sure you're aware, East Greensboro is a heavily impoverished area. And if we have to choose between spending a few $100s on a street light and some food, we're going to be in the dark.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. So it is, I mean, I asked that question because I know that, the Department of Transportation does its best to spread between roadways and street lighting and all of that. And sometimes we can't even do anything with state-owned roads, right? But it's something that I've observed. I want to know if that's even a conversation that the community has had, and if people feel that that's a challenge for us. And then that allows me to go back to our staff and say, okay, I want to see what our plans are for the next several years as to how do we install some of these lights. I've heard of solar panel powered lights that could be installed. In some other jurisdictions, there are some regulations against those. But I need to understand clearly what the sentiment of the community is, and then I work with our staff to see how we can make sure that we are contributing positively to public safety, especially when it comes to that in certain parts of our community. Of course, street lights, investment in them versus investment in other things. People may say, well, I don't need this. But sometimes when people drive and they can see their own headlights, they don't notice the absence of street lights. But when people are walking, and because they are forced to, or they get out of a bus to walk a few blocks to their home, they notice the absence of street lights and the presence of darkness. And so how can we make a connection between all of those things together? That's really what's in my head. But I thank you for bringing that up. Well, I'll hand off to... Oh, you have one more thing, thank you.
I am fairly new to Greensboro. I've only been here 5 years, but I do a lot of volunteering. And I know the city employs an arborist and has an urban forestry department that does that kind of planning stuff, because they're going to come to the east side of town and help beautify and make those streets a little bit more vibrant and safe. And as for the streetlights, I've sat through hearings on the east side of town. It always comes back to, well, it's not really Greensboro. It's the State Department, blah, blah, blah. It's their street. So I think what we have to do is get a bunch of committees from those different utilities together to get the light situation where it needs to be.
I agree. Thank you.
Thank you. That concludes this edition of Talk with Ty, our city manager listening sessions. This is number 8 of 10. So you have 2 more opportunities to participate. If you think of more ideas or comments or questions you have, the next listening session is Wednesday, March 9th at the Leonard Recreation Center at 6 p.m. Leonard Recreation Center is at 6324 Ballinger Road. And the final listening session is Thursday, March 10th at 6 p.m. at the Kathleen Clay Edwards Family Library. That's at 1420 Price Park Drive. These are all captured on YouTube. If you want to go back this evening and replay this particular session, we have all the previous 7 before this one, and then we will also be live on the 9th and the 10th on YouTube if you cannot be there in person. Thank you so much. Have a good evening.